I'm feeling good, relaxed, but strangely inadequate.
Welcome to my world.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Well, ho, 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 the real David Cameron. We have arrived at the end of 2025. How are you feeling? Are you still in one piece?
I'm still in one piece, although I do feel completely outgunned by your show of festive joy. Um, Clearly, I've made no effort at all. The best I've done is put on like a really warm jumper, and you've got that marvelous full star Santa hat. So, you know, I'm feeling good, relaxed, but strangely inadequate.
Welcome to my world. I'm feeling, as well as my festive glow, I have a another kind of glow. Yesterday, I went for my first ever winter swim in the sea, and
Wow.
I am already addicted to it, I believe. Is it possible to be addicted to something after one exposure? I am primed for the next one. And I'm normally somebody who takes a long time to get into the sea at the best of times. Like it takes, one of those people who's like 20 minutes and I'm still up to my knees and whooping at every inch creeps on my body. But yesterday was not like that. It was partly because I did neoprene. My goodness, neoprene is this like wonder material. Had boots and gloves, and my hands were like not even remotely cold. And it was quite choppy. It was quite a baptism of big old waves sloshing over our heads. Um, but just so exhilarating and super fun. And I just want more of that in my life. So yeah, I don't know. Are you a cold water swimmer? Have you ever been?
Well, I live in Scotland, so any form of swimming is cold water swimming. But James, never heed the swimming. I mean, what you have just done is remarkable. You've come up with the core analogy for the review of the year. You've done that brilliantly. It's really choppy out there. We know that. It's choppy around behavior, it's choppy around attendance. I mean, actually, it's so choppy that you've been referring to it as a polycrisis for
Right.
about the last 4 or 5 episodes that we've done. You've suggested that, we would normally struggle to get into the water at all. But if we actually make the right moves, take the right steps, do the right things, then it's possible to get in there and actually enjoy it. And maybe there's a real powerful metaphor there about what this year's been like, because we've seen lots of really positive things. We've been very exhilarated at times, but I think we've reached the end of it. The choppiness is still going on. And nobody's really coming up with anything as radical as a full neoprene bodysuit to allow us to get in there and make the changes that we really want and need to make. How does that sound for picking up on your early contribution?
God, you're good at this. You're really good at this. That was the mother of all segues. Well done. It almost sounds like as though we'd rehearsed it. Um, my goodness, what does the full neoprene suit look like? Well, so there was some sort of garments that we donned recently with the curriculum and assessment review, and we're going to come on to that. But let's just do a quick catch up first. How is your last few weeks and months been? What have you been up to?
Yeah, well, I was back at the Association of Secondary Heads Essex conference, which I did several times back in the day before COVID. It was lovely to be back and great to be at an organization that's so collaborative, so positive, and it stands out as a real landmark. It involves all the schools in Essex, regardless of status. It gets a really good turnout, really good commitment. They work between the meetings and they've got their own band. So that was a really good occasion. And it also gave me the opportunity to hear some very, very good people. Laura McInerney was there, and she's always an absolute delight.
Mm.
But the guy that was on just before me was some bloke called Clive Woodward, who seemingly has some success in the rugby field.
Yeah, was he like the England manager for a while?
He was the manager when they won the World Cup.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was so impressed because unlike a lot of speakers with his kind of background and reputation, he was there right at the start of the day. He sat through the entire morning. He made links into the other speakers. It was very impressive. It was a really modest display from somebody who had some really good stories to tell.
That's where you get your segue game from. It's because you're mixing with the great and the good of the after dinner circuit people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Right. I was in Essex. It was Essex that you just said, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was working in Essex recently. There's a group of schools, a trust of primary schools that I was working with, and I did a whole day of making change stick training with the senior teams from 4 schools. And I'm going to be going back and spending a few days going into the schools and seeing how they're getting on in the coming weeks. And that was just a wonderful thing to see. And it was so nice because some of the tools that I've sort of shared with people before, but not really had the time to explore, we really explored in detail. So one of the things is a root cause analysis, which I might have discussed before, where it's like you use the metaphor of a tree. So the trunk of the tree is like, what's the problem that you're trying to solve? And the branches of the tree are the consequences of that problem. And then the roots are the root causes. And so it gives you a framework for just like trying to excavate, what's going on underneath these sort of surface behaviors and surface problems that we see. And it's a really interesting exercise. And we basically spent the whole afternoon just doing that. And two of the four schools focused on behavior. And it's really interesting. I used to work for Pivotal Education, and I've done a bit of stuff around behavior in the past, but I haven't done for a long time. But it's just coming through as such a strong message now, partly through this work that I was doing with these schools, partly through. So we're recording this in mid-December, and I don't know if have you seen this this report that's just been published about Mossbourne Academy in
Yep.
So, I mean, we probably don't need to trail this too much because it's literally just like everywhere on social media at the moment. It has lit what used to be called edu Twitter, whatever the smoking remnants of edu Twitter that exist in, dotted around on Blue Sky and LinkedIn and what have you, is ablaze at the moment with the usual suspects going out to bat for very, what sound like very strong arm coercive behavior management strategies, shouting at children, giving detentions for the slightest, apparently for turning around to look at the clock or for bending down to pick something off the floor or something. And it sounds like there's a bit of a campaign of harsh discipline has been running at that school. The usual suspects, as I say, coming out to defend for it, but this time it has really taken root. And I noticed that Schools Week said on LinkedIn, they were like, we don't usually publish stories about a single school because, the people are always complaining about single schools. But in this case, we're going to make an exception because it does feel a bit like a turning point has been reached with this report. I don't know how much you've had a chance to look at it, whether you've actually read the report yet or not. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I mean, I think it links back to the discussion we started off with in lots of ways, right? If our ambition is not to build schools and to build an education system that caters for all young people, then there is very little point in having an education system at all. The whole point, I think, of schools is that they bring people together to learn, and thereby they create a social environment. And that's one of the most compelling reasons for having schools. We now have lots of other ways where people can learn. We now have lots of other contexts in which people can learn. We can have people dotting between learning environments. But we're undermining consistently the concept of community and collectivism in our society. We're doing it politically, we're doing it economically, we're doing it through the dominance of neoliberalism as a form of thinking. And we just desperately need organizations that bring people together. And to have a school which serves possibly even a majority of students really well in one particular aspect of education, that's a really narrow focus and a really narrow aspiration. And surely, goodness, in a world that we have at the moment that's as divided and difficult as it is, we need to aim for more than that, surely.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a bit like Boeing coming back saying, yeah, most of the passengers got there and had a really good journey. And the fact that a number fell out, but, I think maybe we just need to live with that.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That's very, very well put. I've been thinking about this stuff as well. There's quite a strong theme emerging in this conversation already. We're going to come back to the curriculum review, but first of all, just to take a little detour, there's a podcast that I listened to this week. There's a couple of podcasts that are on the same theme. And it was a story about this kid who was from Nottingham, from the Meadows estate in Nottingham, very, very deprived area of the country. And he was grew up in a single parent household, and his mum wasn't really around particularly. His dad was off the scene, and he became a member of a gang. And there was this sort of code of conduct within the gang that if any of you or your gang is in a fight, which is happening quite often, that you would just go in and stick up for them, right? And so this kid was 19, and he had received a phone call. He'd been out celebrating, he'd been drinking and taking goodness knows what throughout the day, celebrating his friend's birthday. Was told to go to this bar where this situation was kicking off, and he just got involved with this scuffle. A friend of his was facing up against some guy, and he ran over and punched this guy and then ran away, and that was it. And didn't really know much more about it, probably didn't remember that much about it because he was been drinking for about 12 hours or whatever. And a month went by and he never heard anything, and he went on holiday and stuff in that time. And then when he eventually, the news caught up with him, it turned out that this guy had died, mainly from the impact of his head hitting the floor. And so this kid went to prison for manslaughter. And then he made contact through the restorative practice. Interestingly, following our conversation that we had with Dave Whitaker recently, is obviously happens in prisons as well as in schools. But it's not offered to that many people, and there's a lot more capacity within the system for prisoners to engage in restorative justice. But through this program, he made contact with the boy's parents, and it's so interesting. And this thing has now been turned into a play. So there's a play, I think it's called The Punch, perhaps, and it's on currently.
Called Punch, yeah.
Punch,
James Graham.
That's right. James Graham has written it. Right, exactly. So you're familiar.
And they're converting it for a school tour.
That's right, yeah. And it's the only play apparently to have launched both on Broadway and in the West End at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's non-profit. All the profits are going to raising awareness around restorative practice. But there's a few I really recommend. So the play is based on this short Radio 4 series that the protagonist, the puncher, if you like, is called Jacob Dunn. This guy, he made this show about 3 or 4 years ago on Radio 4, and that's called The Punch. And then recently, he was in an interview with Amal Rajan, the host of the Radio 4 Today program, and that was a really in-depth conversation. And I really recommend to people to dig this out and listen to it. And it's on BBC Sounds. And there's quite a few moments in there which were just so moving. And there was one in particular where he talks about the boy's parents. He was communicating with them, first of all, just through a mediator. And at one point, the boy's parents said to him, "What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to do next? How are you going to turn this around?" And at the time, he was still only 21 or something, and he was in prison. And he said that that single question, the act of asking that question, of somebody taking an interest in him and saying, like, what are you going to care about? He said, that's what allowed me to start caring for myself. And it's so powerful, that. And then later on, he kept coming back to this point. He kept saying that the quality of your life is the sum of the quality of your relationships, of how well you're known. And at one point, Amal Rajan asks him, like, how can a kid in a gang stab somebody? How can you do that at the age of like 14 or something? And he just brought it back to that same point, and he was like, if you're not known by people, if there's nobody who sort of knows you or loves you or respects you for who you are, you don't have respect for yourself, and you're going to do horrendous things. And he talks a lot about, his prison sentence was quite short, and some people were saying it was too short. But he was like, the problem with that is that when you come out of prison, if you've been in for a long time, it's really hard to make those relationships with people. People don't want to be in a relationship with you. It's very hard to start a family. And that's why so many people are repeat offenders, right? Because they don't have those networks of relationships. And I know that was a very long introduction to bring you back to education, but it really just made me think about the way that we're spending time, all of this precious time in schools, and the extent to which the assessment system and the school system and the system of sort of atomizing everything into subjects, and the kids are in seating plans, and they're sort of separated from their friends often in those seating plans because it's seen that it's a bad thing to be talking with your friends during a lesson. Is that we're just like, that's just not an objective of the education system. Is to, like, we should be turning this whole thing around and thinking, like, how can we make these kids feel connected and plugged in and cared for? And you could systematize that. You could fire up spreadsheets if you wish. It's like, who is this kid's known adult? Who is the adult who knows them the best? Who are their friends? Who are the like adults outside of school that maybe take an interest in their life, like a sports coach or a music coach or a youth worker or something? And how can we make it so that every young person has this network of support around them? And we've gone the other way in that sense, haven't we? In recent years, there's lots of youth centres and after school clubs and provisions and so on have been put as a consequence of austerity. But it just feels like, when Dave was talking about relational practice, right, and killing them with kindness, I feel like I'm starting to get what that means. But it does, like, if we're going to take that seriously, then, and we're going to make it so that, like, to come back to your point, every single kid in the system leaves school feeling and knowing that they are known and understood and respected and loved by a range of people. Yeah, that's where we need to get to,
I was in Passmores week before last.
Oh yeah.
Doing some interviews and some filming for an online course on behaviour,
right,
that we're working on, and I wanted to get more of a feel. So I wandered into the dining hall during lunchtime, and this kid came over to me and he goes, "Would you like to be my friend?" And I said, "Oh, that's very kind of you to ask. Thank you very much. I'd be very, very happy to be your friend." And he said, "Well, come over and meet my other friends." So I'm taking over to this table, and he's like, "Douglas Mason, this is my new friend. This is one of my other friends." And I got this whole kind of, broad Essex round the table series of introductions, and then had to excuse myself from this new coterie of friends that I'd made and go back and do some work. But the point I'm trying to get at is that there's a school which places a big emphasis on that. And it came through very consistently in all the interviews that we did. We interviewed students, we interviewed people who were not teachers but worked in the school. We interviewed teaching staff, school leaders. We interviewed Vic Goddard, who's the CEO of the trust.
mm-hmm.
And that whole culture came through. And we've been picking up on that all the time, that, we need to stop thinking of it as an either or. Your references to the smoking post-Holocaust hell that is edu-Twitter, where people dig trenches at the drop of a hat. and like nothing better than dispute. You know, we really need to move away from that and recognize that for some young people, relationships are the only thing that matters because they don't have them anywhere else. But for all young people, they matter. You know, I've done a couple of interviews recently with people who attended boarding school. I interviewed a guy, Angus Bell, recently for another podcast that I do. And his experience of school was horrendous. He emerged completely broken by it. And there are, you know, endless accounts like that now of boarding school survival, massive scandal in Scotland around Edinburgh Academy and all of that. And yet these schools are probably in many respects the template for places like Mosbourne, you know, except, you know, I'm not suggesting that they have the boarding or necessarily that they have the brutality, but that whole idea of this is what works, classic, old school, the private school model. And we just need to start thinking a bit more widely than we're doing at the moment.
Yes, we do indeed. Which I think brings us back to the curriculum review quite neatly, doesn't it? Here's me now picking up on your segue game. I don't recall relationships coming through particularly strongly in the review or in our conversation about the review. Having had some time to reflect on that, what are your thoughts following our conversation with John and Lisa, two of the panelists from the curriculum and assessment review?
I mean, one of the first thoughts is that I think we're too ready to reach for what I would talk about as holistic solutions. So, you know, the argument that I think I possibly made in the podcast now is that anything that's happening, anything that you would like to happen in education is probably happening somewhere. We have lots and lots of good practice. We have lots and lots of beacons of hope in schools and in communities. There's marvelous stuff going on in some places. And yet, rather than saying, well, how do we change it in the places where it's not happening? We have a curriculum and assessment review. So what we do is we change the context. The response that we got when we touched on that area in the conversation was a fair one. And that is that it makes it easier for good practice to thrive if we can get the curriculum and assessment right. And that's a perfectly respectable position, but I think we're far too quick to change the big building blocks rather than actually confront the reality of practice. And I think we also, big thing from that conversation, we also wrestled with this whole idea of, well, we'll only make the changes that the system can cope with.
Yeah.
And I'm a big advocate of manageability. I'm very aware of the pressures on schools, of workload, and all of that. And I think we really need to be mindful of that. But I think we might have come up with a better combination of recommendations within the review that would have addressed workload in other ways. And I think could have given more place to the idea that it's about what happens to young people in schools and classrooms. That's what makes the biggest difference to attainment. John Hattie's work says that. You know, generally reviews of school effectiveness and school improvement say that it's what happens between adults and children that make the biggest difference, regardless of curriculum. And yet that, you know, that was a priority.
Yeah. It was really interesting, wasn't it? It was a very wide-ranging conversation, and the one thing that really stands out as I look back at it was the conversation that we had around GCSEs. And one of the recommendations in the curriculum and assessment review is to reduce the number of GCSEs, or the amount of time that is spent sitting GCSEs, by 10%. And I pointed out that that's like 90 minutes. If you've got a 90-minute paper, that's 9 minutes off a 90-minute paper, which is, not that much really. And the response from both John and Lisa was quite strong. And John sort of said quite strongly, he was like, well, if you were looking to abolish GCSEs, like that was never going to happen in this review. And I remember sort of feeling a little bit taken aback when he said that. And I sort of went straight to a negotiating position, if you like. And I was like, well, maybe not abolish them, but perhaps reduce them by more than 10%. And then it became a debate about whether or not, it should be 20% or 30%. But actually, I really wish that I'd said, well, why not? Like, why not look at whether or not we should abolish them? Like, did you even talk about that within the team? Because there are really, really good reasons to abolish them. And if they're ever going to be abolished, it's going to be through something like the curriculum and assessment review. And so why did you not even look at that? Is it because you don't think that the profession is ready for it, or do you think it's just because it's beyond the pale? Because there are things have changed, very serious things have changed since GCSEs were invented. One being that the science has changed about, and I mentioned this in the podcast, our understanding of adolescent brain development. Professor Sarah Jane Blakemore, I had her on the podcast a while ago, who's a professor of like adolescent brains, amazing person. If anyone hasn't read The Secret Life of the Teenage Brain, I thoroughly recommend it. I think the book's called Inventing Ourselves. And she said, when we invented GCSEs, we didn't think that brain development was still happening at age 16. We thought the brains were basically cooked by the age of like 10 or 11, and that they're just sort of mini adults, and we need to just sort of police them a bit like mini adults. And now we understand that adolescence goes on until something like 25. And the amount of changes that are happening in a teenager's brain, especially around the ages of like 14 to 16, well, lots of synaptic pruning going on. There's lots of demyelination going on. There's all kinds of really complicated changes that are happening in the way that people think and understand themselves and the world. And they become much more concerned with relations, right? With making connections, that whole thing that teenagers have where they just like, they don't want to be seen to be, like making connections with adults anymore. It's how they stand with their social group that's all important. And while people sort of say, well, the exams provide a level playing field, it's anything but, because the range of neural development in that 1 month of like May to June among 15 to 16-year-olds is absolutely vast. And so they're not competing, they're not playing on the same field. And also, as you mentioned earlier before we started recording, the school leaving age has changed to 18 now. Like it was 16. Before that, it was 14. And we had a Rosler block, the raising of the school leaving age to 16 was a big thing. And now we have kids, the vast majority of kids are staying in until 18. And so why are we having this really stressful exam at the age of 16 that takes up all the time and more time? It takes up all the time, and you always feel like you've got more to do. The teachers are stressed out, the kids are stressed out. You never, you described it the other day, didn't you? You said that they're unteachable. The national curriculum, you can't do it in the time available. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And so that's a definition of stress, like having too much to do and not enough time to do it in. And so I wish that I'd pushed back harder on that and asked, well, why not? Why are we not considering actually doing something a bit more radical here?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem was that it was a kind of exploration, if you like, of the review rather than a critique. And, I think it was important in the time that we had to let the two of them tell us about the review. And the challenges that the Francis Review faced were enormous. There's absolutely no doubt of that. Maybe a curriculum and then an assessment review might have made it a bit more manageable. That the idea that curriculum and assessment are so interweaved, you can't consider one without the other, and then not really giving assessment the weight that it has, if that's the truth.
I agree.
That,
but also pedagogy, like these are what Tim Brighouse and Mick Waters call I never quite got their metaphor. They call it the three-sided wheel, but it's like the three legs of the stool, as it were.
yeah.
Curriculum, assessment, and pedagogy was not up for discussion there at all.
No, and assessment has a major impact on pedagogy as well. I think it's really important to think about all of these things together. But it was a big, bold step. I mean, I have no doubt at all of the level of commitment of Becky Francis and the panel. And they have, in many respects, if you're going to come up with a compromise, it's a pretty good compromise. It has very good elements in it. It offers a lot of hope to people who want more change. It offers a lot of challenge to people who are resolutely tied to the status quo. It takes us forward. We're debating whether it takes us forward far enough. But it's that whole thing, isn't it? That, I think you wouldn't be in the Education Policy Alliance or whatever. You wouldn't be organising events to discuss the possibility of radical change and then suddenly turn around and say, yeah, that compromise will do me. So, there's an argument that the likes of you and I are never really going to be satisfied until we get some utopian version of the education system. And so, I think they deserve enormous credit for what they've done. And I hope they felt that they got that in the podcast.
Yeah, I think so. I think that we did a good job of sort of like giving. You're right. It was more an exploration than a critique. And I was just quite surprised. That was all. I was just quite surprised that it was just sort of like they both seemed to be quite strong in their defense of like just not changing the GCSE by much. And I was a bit surprised by that. But yeah, of course. You and I are perhaps outliers, and maybe that's our job, is to try to stretch the Overton window in a little bit of a different direction. Yeah. Okay. So let's look ahead, right? So we're on the verge of tipping into 2026. 2025 has been pretty bleak as years go, right? On the international front, especially. Yeah. And on the domestic front, actually, and so let's look at things to be hopeful for in 2026, and our plans for this podcast. I'd like to hear from you first, and then I'll share my thinking. But what is there on the horizon that is making you feel like all might not be lost just yet?
Yeah, I think the Francis Review, whatever criticisms people make of it, at least has brought that debate to the forefront, and we need to follow up on that. I think I've been enormously encouraged by some of the conversations that we've had. The two events that we spoke about, the next decade, the event that the EPA were involved in. I think the existence of groups like Whole Education, other groups like that, I think that offers me considerable hope. And I think there is sufficient momentum, I think, to build on. I think there's a growing knowledge and a growing understanding of the kind of issues that you've been touching on, James, about the importance of relationships, about connection, of belonging. There's lots of reasons for hope, as I said earlier, on the ground. I mean, there are some marvelous schools doing really, really impressive work, often in very, very difficult and challenging circumstances. And I think we've illustrated a lot of that. I think we've had some guests on in 2025 who've made me feel very positive indeed. I thought Amjad Ali was a great example of somebody talking about SEND, talking about special needs, offering really straightforward, pragmatic ways forward.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would hope that we can do in 2026 is kind of channel that and focus that a bit more so that we illustrate that the potential that we seek is being achieved and can be more widely achieved.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I think that just generally speaking, my thinking has shifted more from critique to just like making useful things and sharing useful things. And so on the podcast front, I would really like to focus in on inviting guests for shorter episodes just to shine a light on like examples of positive practice. And that takes a number of different forms. I had an exchange earlier today, for example, with Sarah Selesnyov, who works for Big Education, and she did a really good talk at the Festival of Education in the summer. I was sitting with her in the Becky Francis session as we were both muttering under our breaths, wondering how the curriculum review was going to pan out. And then Sarah did a really interesting session where she was just shining a light at all of this really cool stuff that's happening. And just to take one example off the top of my head, there is a school where they teach democracy and in year 8, and they do it by getting the kids out on the field, and they camp out for a whole week, and they give them tarps, and some of them have got to make shelters, and the other ones are in charge of the kitchen, and they've got to barter and trade so that some of them get shelter in exchange for food and what have you, and they have these cooperative meetings in the evening to, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful example of like the kinds of things that are happening currently in state schools, where people are doing things that are about connection, that are about doing something out of the ordinary, things that kids will never forget. They will never, ever forget that week of camping out under tarpaulins on the school field. And so I would really like to spend more time inviting people on who are doing brilliant things within the constraints of the system as it currently exists. And that was kind of the theme of the Education Policy Alliance's event that we did in October. And so I'd like to do more of that. And so if there are any listeners or viewers who are either doing things that you would like to shout about and to shine a light on, or if you know of anybody who springs to mind and you think, oh yes, my goodness, this thing deserves to be understood and known about more widely, because that's how we can spread the good news, right? We can spread good practice by not the good news. We can spread good practice. We can spread connection. We can spread warmth and joy and togetherness and botheredness and all of that good stuff. Just by pointing at it and saying, look at this. Look at what you can do if you do X, Y, and Z. And so on the podcast front, I feel very hopeful about this turn that we're going to take, which is going to be much more about focusing a light on things that we like the look of. And then on a personal front, I'm doing more connecting with people myself, and so there's a few things that are coming up in the coming weeks and months. If anybody wants to get involved with these things, we're currently recruiting for 3 programs. One is implementing Oracy. That one starts quite soon. It starts on the 16th of January, and it's a 6-session program that runs from January to June. And it's based, 4 of those sessions are based at Hughes Hall. And I'm working with my colleagues at Oracy Cambridge to put that on. And it's a sort of a combination of research and evidence coming from the academics within our group, plus really practical Oracy strategies. So I'm co-facilitating this with Topsy Page, who's brilliant, and has just written 2 books, one about 100 practical ideas for Oracy for the primary school. And also there's one that she's co-authored with Alan Howe that's about to come out, 100 ideas for Oracy in the secondary school, which will be out early in the new year. So that's very exciting. I'm also doing one called Rebooting Behavior with my old Pivotal Education buddy, Tara Ellie. And she's done lots of work around the psychology of mattering, and I'm bringing the implementation know-how. And so that's really interesting. And we're focusing on lots of the stuff that we've been talking about today, about relational practice and the importance of mattering, the importance of being seen and heard and understood. And that goes for the staff as much as for the kids.
Yeah.
And I'm also doing one called Implementing Botheredness with our mutual friend and friend of the podcast. And annoyingly, the bloody Spotify yesterday told me like what all the most positive, the most popular episodes of the year were. And the most popular one was an episode that I wasn't even involved in. It was when Tim Taylor interviewed Howell Roberts, and it was like 4 hours long. And even and they smashed it. Well done, guys. I'm thrilled for you, as you can see. So I'm going to be working with Howell on implementing botheredness, which I'm super excited about. And then lastly, if I may just blow my trumpet for a moment, right? So like my sort of, I almost wanted to say origin story, right? But like the thing that the way that I sort of started to work with schools more widely than just like in my own teaching practice was with the learning skills curriculum and the learning to learn initiative that I was involved in teaching, and I did a PhD evaluating the impact of this thing. And since then, we wrote a book about it in 2020 with my friend Kate McAllister. We wrote this book called Fear is the Mind Killer. And since then, we've worked with a small number of schools, always internationally. There is just nothing happening on this front in England. But I've been doing lots of work in Wales and lots of work overseas. And just for the last 2 weeks, we've been working with a school in Melbourne to help them set up what they're calling a learning lab. And they've got 5 lessons a fortnight to spend on this with years 7 and 8 to start with. And we've done quite an intensive training program, and it's really unsociable hours. I've been working like 9 till 10 p.m. Every night, and Kate has been thankfully Kate's in a more friendly time zone, being in the Caribbean, and so she was able to work with them till later. But I just want to blow my own trumpet, if I may, because there was an email that I received earlier today from the principal of this school, and it says, James, the PD was exactly what I was after, and it has gone down so well with the staff. The energy and the excitement is great to see and be a part of. It's even more amazing given it's the end of a long year and people are so tired. So kudos to the both of you. And he goes on to saying that like they actually want to push the learning lab teachers are pushing to do more with the whole staff. Like they were initially thinking we're just going to start small and build this out. And now these people are so enthused that like we just need to go for it and make this a whole school thing. And that's wonderful to see. And the reason that I want to blow my trumpet about that is that like it is genuinely amazing the work that happens when you work in this way, this beyond subject learning. Like, so this is curriculum time, 5 lessons a fortnight and there's no maths textbooks or geography textbooks or PowerPoint slides. We're doing project-based learning. We're doing oracy. We're doing lots of metacognition and reflection. And we're doing like philosophical inquiry and all of these things that are out there that there's really good evidence for, that like there's a good case for doing these things. Mm-hmm. And we're actually building a curriculum that is based solely around this stuff. It's not replacing subject learning. It's 5 lessons a fortnight. There are also 45 lessons a fortnight that are not doing this, right? So it's 1/10 of the curriculum time. But I'm very enthused by this, and I want to make a bit of an attempt in 2026 to let people know that this exists, because I feel like, you know, just by word of mouth, we've worked with a small number of schools. We're probably, you know, touching into double figures, but not a lot of schools that we've worked with over the last few years. And I imagine that there are thousands of schools out there who would be interested in setting up something like this, but they don't really know how. Well, we know how. We know how to do it. We've been doing it for 15 years now, and it's pretty good stuff. And so if you're interested in that, or if you know of any schools, or if you want to get your kids' school perhaps to take a look at this, then drop us a line. So yes, I do feel very hopeful on a number of different fronts going into the next year. And I don't want to throw shade too much at the curriculum review. They didn't abolish GCSEs, but there are lots of things to be cheerful about in that report, especially the focus on oracy. I think is the most transformational thing that I think I've seen in my time in 20 years in the profession. The fact that oracy is going to finally receive the attention that it needs after 60 years since that word was invented in an attempt to give spoken language equal parity to speaking and listening. That is absolutely monumental. And if that's the only thing that happens, I can end this year very happy. So yes, lots to be cheerful about.
Yeah, and I'm all for you blowing your own trumpet. I mean, I hate it when people do that. Don't blow your own trumpet. You shouldn't blow your own trumpet. I mean, it's a hygiene issue. Whose trumpet are you supposed to blow? I think it's a really bad idea for people to be just roaming the land, blowing any old trumpet they happen to come across. So by all means, blow your own. I think we should draw the line at having you interview yourself on a podcast in order to share the wonders if you're working in Melbourne. But, up to that point, James, I'm with you. Let's have more fanfares. And let's have fanfares for people who really earn it and really deserve it. And there are so many people out there doing that. And this is the Christmas roundup, so good to end on a totally festive note. There are people who not only deserve to celebrate, but deserve to be celebrated. And if we're going to do more of that in the coming year on the pod, I'm up for that too.
Hallelujah. Right. On that note, let's sign off for this year. Thank you, everybody who has been with us for this journey, or perhaps has only just tuned in to this conversation, this ongoing conversation. If you're new to this, check out some of the back episodes. There are some absolute zingers. And keep your eye peeled for much more exciting, positively framed new stuff coming down the track in 2026. Until then, have a wonderful Christmas and New Year, everybody, and we will see you on the other side.
Thank you, and all the best.
How it is and how it should be, wrestling in the streets again. One's got the other by its expectations. The other is going for a submission. Hope has stoicism by the neck. Acceptance is struggling for breath. Has it on the ropes, but what I want is being choked. My wheels being dragged through a hedge backwards, but not before it bloodied the nose of the world. Happy as it boxed the years of change, contented, assaulted, progress with a change. May you find kindness under that stone. May the fall come early this year. That bridge should be finished this year. You can go